Hello, I'm Steph from iDriver Classic and today we're testing out a Princess 2200. Now here's the thing, I wasn't really expecting to test this today. I bumped into Alan at Bewley Auto Jumble and he said, Steph, if you've got time on your way back, why not stop in and test my Princess? And I thought, A, what a fantastic offer, and B, what a spectacular car. I've been in love with it for a very long time, so I couldn't say no, and I've done a bit of a detour to come and test it and share it with you today. Now in today's video, if you've never watched one of these before, we're going to walk you around the outside, show you the dash, under the bonnet, inside the boot as well, and we're going to walk you through a bit of history, tech spec, and also take you out for a test drive today and hopefully teach you a few bits about the Princess that you may not have known before watching this video. All the information is being gleaned from tests at the time, brochures issued to BL salesmen, and also brochures of the era. So we know that the information in this video is as provided at the time of the car's launch. Right, let's kick off and we'll get walking around the car. Although it's the car most people think of when the name Princess pops up in automotive circles, the AD071 Princess wasn't the first car to bear the Princess name. In fact, it had been used on vehicles since the 1940s, when it was applied to the most expensive model in the Austin range, and then used in the 1950s for the deluxe version of the BMC range of exec cars. By 1975, when it first got applied to the AD071 car, the Princess name hadn't been in use since the early mid-60s, and then when it was used on the 1800, 2200 cars, before being used on the 1700, 2000 and 2200 cars badged as the Princess 2, which is what we're testing here today. Now, it might be called the Princess, but some of you will know it as the 1822 Series 2. The idea behind going for the Princess badging was to unite the various cars being churned out by Austin, Wolseley and Morris. Again, it's another patching up exercise as British Leyland tries to make all the brands work together in harmony. There's a lot around badging exercises and naming exercises that we've talked about in many of the videos. A really good example of this actually is the AD016, which seems to carry a million different badges. You might also know this car, by the way, as the Austin Princess. It was never called that in the UK, but I know that it was called that in some of the overseas markets. I think in New Zealand actually is one of them. Now, the car was designed by the late, great Harris Mann, who we only actually lost a few months ago at the time of making this video. And he was a man who didn't just stick to the same old tired designs, but really seemed to care about what he designed and really tried to bring in new concepts and challenge what was on the forecourt. In my opinion, he was one of the really great designers of last century because he really challenged stuff, and sometimes his stuff really didn't come to fruition, but when you look at the original drawings you think really knew his stuff. Now, if you're wondering what other cars that he was involved with, he gave us cars like the TR7 and the Austin Allegro and this Princess, of course, as well as being involved in many other cars which were commonplace during the era. And in fact, Harris Mann actually said that the Princess was one of his favourite designs because the end result so closely resembled his vision, which was one of his grumbles with cars like the Allegro, because really it didn't match up to his concept at all. And this car, the Princess, was a car that he designed to bring BL into the modern age. And in many ways it did when you talk about things like the hydrogas, which we're going to talk about later on when we go for a drive. Now, I sing the praises of this car today on test, and I genuinely really liked it in a way that maybe I didn't expect to. Now, a lot of people sometimes say to me, well, Steph, you didn't live during the era and you've got rose-tinted glasses. But my fact for you today is it wasn't just me who liked it, because Autocar rated the 2200 HLS that they tested in 1977 as one of the best cars that they'd tested that year. So I guess I'm not the only one that thinks this about these cars. Tech spec wise, we chat an awful lot later on in the video, but here's a brief recap on some of the bits. We have the 2.2 litre engine in this, but even with the 1700 and 2000, you weren't hard done by. So the max speed, if you went for the 1700, was 99 miles per hour. The 2000 promised 98 miles per hour, and the 2200 promised a driving lights busting 105 12.4 miles per hour. The 0 to 60 on the 1700 was 15.7 seconds, 14.6 for the 2000, and for the 2200 like we got 11.8 seconds 0 to 60, which makes it far quicker than I was expecting and maybe you were expecting too. The car's fitted with rack and pinion steering and has a turning circle of 37.8 feet, as per the BL Salesman booklet. However, if you look at official brochures of the time, they list it as an inch or two out from that in places. But look, we're just going to go with 37.8 feet. The turns lock to lock on the 1700 and the 2000 as standard, with non-power assisted steering, is 4.37 turns. But for those paying for a power assist upgrade on the lesser spec models, or those going for the 2200 like we've got here today, where the power steering comes as standard, it's 3.26 turns lock to lock. Sadly, the Princess was a relatively short-lived concept compared to other BL cars, and it came to an end in 1981 and it was replaced by the Austin Ambassador, which, guess what, is another really rare car. You just never see those anymore. Now, I would love to tell you that this car was an absolute winner that really guided BL to a high by the end of the 70s, but it wasn't. And in fact, it didn't get half as much love as it should have done because, really, if we're going to be honest, it's all about the sheer incompetence of management at the time, who allowed that early excitement and goodwill, and there was goodwill because there were months of waiting lists in the first flush of these cars, to dwindle and then just collapse because of things like strike action, varying build quality, and a couple of weak spots which became hot topics, things like the cars munching through drive shafts, for example. Now, I hope today that you can see this car for what it could have been and what it could have offered, and with a positive outlook, because don't let the mismanagement of a fantastic concept be overshadowed by the factors of the time. It had the finesse to beat a Ford and the ingenuity to take on European competitors. But you know what? Due to external factors and people inside not managing things as they should have, it just wasn't to be. Now that's enough gazing back into the past. Let's skip back into 2023. I'm going to show you this true survivor and show you what it offers the discerning classic enthusiast of today. Now, coming inside, one of the first things I want to point out to you is the quality of the workmanship, because quite often I hear people, usually people that have limited to no experience of British Leyland, running down British Leyland cars. They'll say to you they're rubbish, the quality's naff, they don't hold up, they're awful. Not so with your Princess. Now, I know one of the strap lines that they used to sell it was the ultimate in family motoring. It was meant to be the creme de la creme of the range. So I get that. They probably threw the best materials they possibly had at it. But I've got in other stuff from this era where there's been top of the range and it hasn't lasted as well as this. Now, in fairness, this isn't a high mileage vehicle. It's got just shy of 49,000 miles from new. Again, everything's documented on this. It's a 3-owner car. So I was expecting something that was going to be in fairly good fettle. But however well somebody looks after a car, if the raw materials are naff and poor, there's only so far that you can go. So let me show you what we've got inside here, because it is remarkably well specced out, remarkably well laid out as well. But the styling was something that they really pushed on this. In fact, they described this as styling meets engineering. So first of all, the glove box, which is lovely and chunky. I would have expected a bit more with it being the ultimate family vehicle, to have a bit more space in that glove box. It is quite shallow there, but one of the things that it does redeem itself with is space for a family picnic, because you've got 2 cup holders there and you also have space for a lunchbox or the sandwiches you've brought from home. When you hear this glove box shut, have a listen. It shuts. It's not tinny, it shuts well. Listen. It just feels like it's got a bit of weight and quality behind it. Now, coming into the centre here, we've got this radio, and this is one of the very few things that have been upgraded inside this car, because I love the originality on this vehicle. Now, this is a modern Bluetooth radio, but it's been designed sympathetically to look like the old AM/FM radios of the 70s, so it doesn't feel too out of place inside the vehicle. Coming down from there, you've got your cigar lighter, which, looking at it, appears to be original. You've got your heater controls in the middle, and you've got a seatbelt warning light, because we're starting to move into that safety critical era of motoring. Coming down from there, you've got your controls here. So this either blows lukewarm air if you select cold, or hot air if you're selecting hot. And this just moves it on and off. And you know what? Even the quality of the plastic used on this feels remarkably sturdy enough. There've been things that I've got into. Do you remember that Volvo, which was beautiful, by the way? And some of the controls just felt a little bit fragile, and I was almost frightened to use them. Not so with that. Now, I talk about putting that critical hat on, and this is one of my criticisms. So coming down from here, you'll notice this blanking space here, and you'll notice there's an indentation, and you might be thinking, well, Steph, this is the 2200 HLS. Surely that's top of the range and it should have everything, and it does. The thing that's missing here is the speaker, because in your Princess 1, this is where the speaker was. In this, they moved the speakers into the door. Something they could have done, I think, to improve the car is put another cubby hole or space in here, just so that you could slot stuff in. With that, it feels a little bit unfinished. Coming in front of us here, you've got 3 gauges, and this is one of the areas where the car really shines. Is I don't think it looks too dated, and I also don't think it looks cluttered. There was something I got into, and I can't remember, it might have been that GT6 many moons ago, when it just felt a bit like things had been plonked everywhere and it didn't feel uniform and correct. In here, feels like everything is very logically laid out and nothing's on top of anything. So running from left to right, you've got your clock, you've got your speedo with an inbuilt trip clock, and on the right hand side you've got the gauge separated into 3, so you've got your fuel, temperature and ammeter. And then you get into this nifty panel on the right hand side, which has everything that you need for a remarkably modern motoring experience and makes the car very usable in 2023. So first of all, you've got your brake warning light, an absolute godsend. You've got your fog lights, you've got your lights, your hazard warning lights, and my goodness, aren't they useful in an old vehicle? You've got your rear screen demist, and then you've got your panel light switch there as well. So really, it's quite simple in terms of what you've got, but I feel like you've got more than enough to be having a decent motoring experience. Coming down from there, it's winter, you fancy a cigarette, you're moving and you're a driver on the go. So what do? Well, you flick out this ginormous ashtray that's almost as big as the glove box, and you flick your cigar or cigarette into there. And that is pretty much everything inside this Princess here today. And I'm sure you'll agree that there's more than enough to be getting on with in terms of having a decent classic / usable motoring experience. And in terms of your controls on the stalk, you've got 2-speed wipers, and you've got your indicators and horn over on the right hand side. Now they feel remarkably familiar, because guess what? They've been picked from the BL parts bin. I've got those on my Marina as well. And in terms of your gears on this, it's full forward speed or synchro on all forward gears. I would expect that because it's meant to be a luxury vehicle. There was an option of a 3-speed auto, which isn't what we've got fitted. We've just got the manual in here today. Another thing I will tell you is if you went for some of the early Princesses or the entry Princesses, you didn't get your power steering as standard. On these, you do get your power steering as standard. Now, in terms of your power and your tech spec, you've got 2.2 litre engine under this. It's the E-Series engine, 110 brake horsepower, and an incredible top speed of 105.4 miles per hour, which is pretty good going when the top speed in this country is 70 miles per hour. It's 0 to 60 in 11.8 seconds, and on your fuel consumption, so I've seen different numbers written everywhere, so I'm going to tell you what I've read. So in terms of a constant steady speed of 50 miles per hour, so I guess trundling along your A roads and things like that, you can expect mid 30s, low 30s, and around town and stop start it's meant to be low 20s. So I said to Alan, what is it really, as someone who's owned this vehicle for 6 years, and he reckons he gets on average 25 to 26 miles per gallon. So I'm quite excited to take this out. I have until today never even been a Princess passenger, let alone, well, passenger seat Princess. Is there any better time to ever use that terminology? And I've never been the driver. So I've got my armrest folded down. I'm going to twizzle myself around into this driver's seat and I'm going to get going. This is one of the most comfortable driving experiences that I've had in quite some time, because These seats are like armchairs. They're better than my armchairs at home. I have original 70s sofas at home, and let me tell you now, these are more comfortable. And you've also got another thing that a lot of people don't really like on older vehicles, or should I say don't like not having. You've got headrests on this as well. So for someone who likes slightly modern creature comfort but likes a classic experience, this might be one for you. Now I'm going to get started up. Have a little listen. So remember, you've got that 6-cylinder 2.2 under the bonnet. Ooh, let's go and have a listen for the back, and then we're going to go out for a drive. Right, let's go on an adventure. I was going to tell you the first thing that grabbed me was how smooth the suspension was, because the hydrogas must have been redone on this. And you often hear people say that riding in a car with well done hydrogas is like riding on a magic carpet. And this car's obviously been done very well, because it's no exception. Because as we ride along Britain's crater-filled, potholed roads, you often get a bit of a jarring experience. But in this, not so. It's just swallowing them up with absolutely no care in the world. And then the next thing I want to talk to you about is the gearbox, because the gearbox on this is an absolute dream to change through. It's so responsive, and it's, you know, like some gearboxes you get in and you just feel like you're battling to find the gear, or it just feels too notchy to be enjoyable as you change through. Not so on this. It's an incredibly refined driving experience, and that goes for the steering as well, because quite often you get in 70s stuff and the power steering feels so light to the point where you feel like you've lost a bit of control of the driving experience, or you don't feel fully in touch with the vehicle. In this, it takes the corners well. As you glide along, it feels so effortless and just beautiful. Now, it might be a little bit louder inside here today than perhaps you're expecting, and that could be because we've got the windows open, because we are roasting. It's nearly 30 degrees outside, which is jolly hot for England. If you're watching from Australia or America, you might say, Steph, that's not hot. But for us, we're not really used to it. Now, one of the things that I thought as well, one of my incorrect ideas that I brought to the table for this test, was that I was going to feel a little bit nervous driving this, because it's a little bit bigger than what I'm used to. It's 14 feet 7 inches long, and I think it's 5 foot 8 inches wide, which makes it decidedly larger than the Morris Minor that I'm used to driving. And so I thought, oh, it's going to feel too big, and I might feel intimidated by it. But as soon as you jump in, you feel immediately at home, because this is a car, in my opinion, that's been designed with the driver in mind. Because as you cruise along, one of the things that grabs you is that your visibility is absolutely perfect. The pillars aren't too wide, so you can see everything around you. The mirrors are perfectly positioned, and the seat is at just the right height. So even me, as a short person, can see, well, just to the end of the bonnet. So I've got a very good idea of how big the vehicle is as soon as I jump in. I was able to manoeuvre out of a very tight space earlier, and I did it without feeling worried or anxious. And for me, that's part of the joy of the driving experience. And I'm actually going to comment on something else that some people might find slightly strange. Is that I don't know if you noticed when we were under that bonnet, but there is so much room under that bonnet that I thought to myself, and I'm someone who works on their own vehicles, I thought there's so much room around this engine that you can manoeuvre everything quite easily. And I thought if I had to work on this engine, the bonnet comes up quite high, there's lots of room to manoeuvre around. It wouldn't be a hard vehicle to work on. So for me, that makes it a more attractive prospect. Some people might find that strange, but I try and look at it objectively as someone who might be going for the full ownership experience. And imagine some people in the 70s as well were doing bits and pieces at home, because people didn't just used to take their cars to the garage willy-nilly. I guess the biggest drawback with these in 2023 is potentially the lack of parts, because these aren't a car where there's loads and loads of them left, and that is a real shame, because that means that parts are scarce. It means that if you need things, you're perhaps having to hunt a little bit longer than people with more commonplace classics, and sometimes that does wear a little bit thin. However, they do have a supportive community, they do have a supportive owners club, and as well, it sits within the wider BMC British Leyland community. So you know that if you are slightly stuck, there will be somebody out there who maybe doesn't have a Princess, but can tap in and say to you, well, I might have that knowledge available. So it isn't completely off-putting if you are watching this and considering buying one. Now, in terms of your braking, because you have got a fair amount of power under that bonnet, they have thought about the brakes accordingly, because sometimes you're getting BL stuff and they haven't thought about the brakes and you think, oh goodness, and you end up with drums all round. In this, you've got discs to front, drums to rear, so it does pull up quite smartly. But I'm not going to be doing any emergency stops today to show you that. The only thing that's really taken me a little bit of time to get my head around is the clutch biting point, because it is quite high. But again, a very small complaint from me. Now, as I cruise along, another thing that I thought as well was that when you read all the brochures for this and you look at everything, it talks about the man, the family man, the man who's going to buy it. And I thought, with it being a car that was very much marketed towards the male of the household, the go-getting man, the man who was making a bit of money, I thought that everything was going to be put together with male proportions in mind, a little bit like that Rover SD1 that we took out, where everything was quite hard to reach. In this, not so, because everything's been put with almost a fingertips reach. You can reach everything even when you're of shorter stature, which makes it a car that even someone of my height can enjoy. Because sometimes cars, whether we think it's sexist or not, and personally I don't, I just think it's one of those things and it's of its time. Sometimes cars are geared towards people of a larger size. Now, I've thoroughly enjoyed this test today. It's been one of my favourites of the year, actually, because I've often thought, what would it be like to drive a Princess, and would it be too much for me? And actually, I've had a really enjoyable afternoon, and I'm so grateful to Alan, because it's been an incredibly hard experience to try and find a Princess, and to find a Princess in this condition, almost impossible. So a huge, huge thank you to Alan for giving me his afternoon to get this filmed up. I feel enormously privileged to take it out, because I know that he doesn't trust just anybody to drive it, so thank you very much, Alan. Would I own a Princess? If we were back in the 70s, absolutely. But in today, with part scarcity, perhaps not. But Alan, I think it's fantastic that you drive it. I love seeing it out at shows. And if you see it out at shows yourself, go up and have a chat with Alan, have a good look at it in person, because I know that it will bring just as much joy to you as it has done to me. Now, that's it from me today. We're back next Sunday with something completely different from a different manufacturer, and it's incredibly rare. I'm enormously excited to show you it. But until then, I'm not giving you any spoilers whatsoever. Take care and drive safely.